Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Great day, Thursday. And Thursday, we talk with elders. I call us elders from around the community, in the neighborhood, about whatever's on our minds. We're waiting to be joined momentarily by my colleague and friend, Ndugu Yusuf Mjini. I'm expecting that Dr. Peter Hayden will join us as well. And I see that my classmate and friend Brenda Lyle Gray is here in the studio or in the back room, and maybe she'll come on the program as well. Uh, this has been an interesting week. I'm interested in getting a sense of how people felt about President Biden's speech this week, the State of the Union, and also interested in our take on what the conflict in Ukraine and Russia uh, assault there means to our people, to the world and to us. Uh, my main concern is that we uh, insert ourselves in every global conversation, that our opinions, our values, our understanding matters, and that it's up to us to ensure that our voice be among those that map futures for humankind, for our planet. I see Brother Yusuf is here. Yusuf, how you doing, man?
Very good. Thank you, brother.
What's on your mind, man?
Well, Ukraine, as you mentioned, is very serious because people are concerned that at worst it could turn into World War III.
Mm-hmm.
And it not only has an impact on that continent, but on ours as well,
Mm-hmm.
because people are concerned about inflation. We see prices going up. I was in a hardware store yesterday, and the man behind the counter was crying. And I asked him if he was all right, and he told me he was a Ukrainian. He was born in Ukraine and was concerned about his family, his loved ones. And so I think that it has global impact, similar to what happened in Crimea, similar to other actions that Putin has taken. And, he's put his nuclear forces on high alert, which I think ought to be alarming to humanity. And he claims it's a direct result of the aggressiveness of the West. And hey, look at, I was talking to Jeff Martin in California just the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff is a past president of St. Paul NAACP and director of the St. Paul Human Rights Department. And he indicated that gasoline is $6.36 a gallon.
Yep.
In Los Angeles, and it's just under $5 in the Bay Area where he now resides. So, the impact of, the supply chain. There are new car dealers that don't have cars because they can't get the computer chips. There's stuff backed up in shipping containers all over our country, all over the planet. And I have a friend who does African imports, and it used to cost him $5,000 to ship a container from the continent to the United States, and it would occur in approximately two to 3 months. And now the cost of shipping a single container has gone up to $50,000, and it could take 9 months to a year to get the material. So it has a lot of implications on everything we do and everything that we own. And we know that all of the precious minerals for telephones, for flat screen TVs, for computers, for all of the technology that we use is coming out of the continent. And the United States has 83 military bases over there. The Chinese are buying up everything that will stand still long enough and creating a significant presence across the 52 nations of the African continent, and that has significant impact on our consumability here in the United States. So there's a lot happening that may not be visible, but certainly has a significant impact.
Think back, Yusuf, if you would, and I talked to somebody about this earlier in the week, and I started the conversation after listening to In Class with Carr, Dr. Greg Carr, the head of Africana Studies at Howard University, and his colleague, Karen Hunter, Dr. Karen Hunter, who hosts the Karen Hunter Show and this project under the banner of this new website that I talk about all the time called Narrative,
Hmm.
narrative with a K, just like knowledge is spelled with a K. And so I think Dr. Carr was reviewing sort of the history of service of African Americans, of Black people in America, in defense of this country, even when the country would not defend us. And he went over, the fact that the heroics that we've always been in the center of, or at the front of, have consistently been denied or poo-pooed by mainstream culture. The fact, for example, of the presence of African Americans, of Black cowboys, grossly misrepresented. If you have to watch just Hollywood, you would think there were none. But the fact is that 1 in 4 of all of the
Sure.
people that were in the West as cow herders were Black men, and Black families were part of creating commerce and societies in the West, and even towns. That's one piece. The operative idea here is that our presence has been consistently erased. That the culture has consistently attempted to erase our existence, our history, and our future, and in doing so, continue to keep us at the perceived margin of existence and of the world. And so he reflected. This is Dr. Carr on the we know about Black soldiers during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
The first shot fired, Crispus Attucks, I think, right?
Sure. They
Uh,
shot him in the butt.
we know about Black heroics in the Civil War. We
Minnesota was the first state, Al,
mhm,
to commit troops to Abraham Lincoln
mhm,
to return south to fight to free the slaves.
there we go.
And there were 219 Black people in the state of Minnesota when the Civil War broke out. More than half of them joined up with the Union Army to fight to free the slaves.
50% of the Black population of the state of Minnesota.
Yeah,
So we know that story. Then we also know about World War I, when our men and women joined the services to support and to prevent the expansion of European imperial designs by Germany, and were among the most decorated soldiers
yeah,
in the European theater. Then, you know, that led to, though, when those soldiers came back to this country, them being once again targeted by supremacists. It was called the Red Summer,
sure.
when they massacred
1919.
Black
Yeah,
people around the country. They started by discombobulating or disabusing the nation of the idea that Black men and Black soldiers were of value to the proposition of America. And
absolutely.
then we go on to World War II, where you talk about um, soldiers with memory, fresh memory of World War I and how we were treated when we returned, having a different attitude, a different posture. And during the war and afterward, negotiating better opportunities, the recognition of our human and civil rights in a way that we had not been able to do in a large scale like that. So there's this history of tension of us. Number one, you could say in World War II, what was in it for us? Well, what was in it ultimately was a chance to negotiate a better status for Black people in America. And that may be the same thing that's on the table right now. So they raised the question when you
Well,
look at
and
Ukraine and Russia.
Al had
Yeah, go
to
ahead.
had to fight
Mhm.
to get combat duty because we were restricted to mopping the floors, working in the boiler room, working
Right.
in the kitchen, shining the general's shoes, and
Stewards, they
yeah,
called them. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um,
absolutely. So there's been this effort to always not acknowledge our humanity, our capability, but to continually exploit, both personally, culturally, and collectively. And that's been the story from our experience with them. But even within that, we demonstrated to ourselves who we were to ourselves differently, and have always maintained this fighting attitude and the attitude and belief that we will overcome.
Sure.
And we have kept marching toward our idea of what freedom and liberation are. And I think we still are here today. So the point of this whole soliloquy, Youssef, is to say that on the one hand, some people might say that we haven't got a dog in the fight between Russia and Ukraine, but we do. And what has been the foundational impetus for our belief in our desire and right to have dignity and freedom has been the statement that until everybody's free, nobody's free.
Yeah.
And I think we embody that more than anybody else on the planet, that our language, our style, our attitude about existence with other human beings is one that has always articulated a vision of freedom as a global, as a universal, as a cosmic quality that we have the capacity to support, sustain, and grow. That's what I'm thinking.
Now, and I would just add to that that we no longer have the national draft per se because we're not in a state of war.
Mhm.
But as was the case during the Vietnam era conflict, there are a tremendous number of young black men and women and other people of color and low income people who, unable to get a post secondary education because they can't afford it or a living wage job, have elected military service. And we know full well that among the soldiers who are being dispatched to the NATO countries that surround Russia, that a disproportionate number of them are men and women of color, and a significant number of African Americans. So we do have a stake in it because those are somebody's husbands, fathers, brothers and sisters, children, or grandchildren. And we have always been about peace. The other dovetail that I would put on the soliloquy that you provided about our participation in military service and otherwise is the notion of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
That we have not only survived, but we have somehow managed to develop in spite of the obstacles that have been placed in our path in terms of being able to fully serve, of being fully recognized as Americans, of being able to take advantage of the GI Bill and to get mortgages, for veterans and for other members of our community, not just in our community, but wherever people wish to reside. And I think that resilience has really been not only the baseline and the foundation of the Black experience on this continent, but it has also been the key to our survival and our development because we have come back and been able to advance on the
Mm-hmm.
shoulders of the generations that preceded us as a direct result of the sacrifices that they made and the contributions that created the privileges and the benefits that we enjoy today. So we are part of a continuum of struggle for the liberation of marginalized groups that have benefited this entire humanity. And I said last week that the civil rights movement was the engine that pulled all of the other social
Yep.
justice movements out of the station of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and whether it's the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the seniors, Great Panthers movement, the American Indian movement, Cesar Chavez, and the work on behalf of the Mexican American migrants, whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, whether it's the Immigration and Naturalization Act that only came about because of the Voting Rights Act of 64 and the Civil Rights Act of 65.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the civil rights movement was the engine that pulled all of the other social justice movements out of the station of discrimination. And all of those movements stood on the shoulders of the civil rights movement and benefited from the organization, from the gains, from the social practices that we developed as a result of the racism that Black people faced being the archetypal form of racism in this country. And Germany when they created the Holocaust, went to South Africa, and Isabel Wilkerson's new book on caste, she talks about they went to South Africa, they went to Australia, and they came to America, and they said, oh my God, these people have mastered this practice of racism over centuries, and we have to mimic what they've done. They adopted everything that the white power structure was doing against black people in this country, except the one drop rule. And they said they couldn't stoop to that depth to practice the one drop rule against the Jews. But it was okay for white people in this country to adopt it. I'll tell you a little funny story.
Yeah.
There was an academician whose name was Dr. Samuel Cartwright, and he was in Louisiana in higher education. And he came up with a disease that was peculiar to Negroes called drapetomania. Okay.
What?
Drapetomania. And drapetomania only affected Negroes, but it was a disease that made Negroes want to run away from slavery. Okay. And he reaped tens of thousands of dollars in grant money and contributions to try and come up with an antidote for drapetomania. And he had to confess that the infection was so powerful that he could not come up with a concoction that could cure it. Okay.
Unbelievable. Dr. B talked about that Friday, actually, on our healing circle, but she made reference to that exact diagnosis.
Drapetomania.
That white people have the audacity to invent, but that's how they also invented history. And that's how they invented themselves as white, which they are not, right? White, black,
James Baldwin said, I wouldn't have to be a nigger if you didn't insist on being white.
That's it. Okay. There we go. And so all of it is part of a fallacy. And part of that is what's at play in Ukraine, between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Putin has tried to claim that geography is part of historical Russia. The Ukrainians say, no, we're part of historical Ukraine. There's always been adjunct to or neighbor to. And there's obviously a lot of intermixing over the centuries. But I think Dr. Carr was saying that a story where a Russian soldier was talking to somebody who was Ukrainian, and the guy said, I speak Ukrainian. And the Russian soldier said, Ukrainian, what is that? That's only a dialect of Russian. And so the question of who can define what language is, who can name it, is important. And the power of naming is really at the center, the power of identity as a shaping force for the future. What do you think?
What it is a historical imposition. It's like Columbus, who took a wrong turn out there on the turnpike of history, landed in the Caribbean, and the Carib and the Arawak Indians, you can count the ones that are alive today on your fingers, Al. That's how devastating that European imposition was. And he said, well, don't you folks know who you are? I sailed to West India. You're West Indians, okay? And we call them West Indians to this day. And you have to be at a party where somebody from India is introduced to somebody from Mystic Lake. And they say, I want you to meet a friend of mine. He's an Indian. And they say, oh, really? What part of India are you from? Madras? Punjab?
No, Mankato.
The American brother says, oh, no, I'm not that kind of Indian. And the guy from India says, well, what other kind of Indian is there? Because he's from India. So he's an Indian. And Columbus called these folks West Indians or Indians. And we still practice that historical imposition to this day. I refuse to use the term. Okay. And in South Africa, the Calvinists, the Dutch, came up with a term for describing black people. You know what it was? They said we were reprobate. Okay. And that means those whom God has bypassed. Now, what greater insult could you pay peace-loving human beings than to say that God has bypassed you? Therefore, whatever we do to you is justified. And we have a manifest destiny to control you, to subjugate you, and to make you, the lowest things on the planet. Or the founders of this country in the Constitution defining us as 3/5 of a human being, because in many of the southern states, there were more African Americans
Hmm.
than there were white people.
Hmm.
And they were talking about how many representatives people would have in Congress. They said, oh no, we can't give them majority representation to take control of the democratic process. So we're going to reduce black people and Indians to 3/5 of a human being. Article 1, Section 3C, declaring us 3/5 of a human being. And we, as I said, resilience. We have not only survived, but we have developed in spite of the oppositions placed in our path. So we need to, every morning we can get up and look in the mirror as a celebration, brother, because at the end of the Civil War, what did they propose? Liberia was created as a state for newly freed slaves to leave the United States and go back to Africa. We don't know where you're from, but we're going to send you to Liberia. And there were
Hmm.
Americo-Liberians in the government, in the presidency. You know, they were an elite group within the country. But it's unbelievable. And Marcus Garvey went to Liberia because people believe incorrectly that Garvey wanted all black people to go to Africa. Garvey wanted black people with skills.
Hmm.
He wanted architects and doctors and teachers and lawyers and plumbers and contractors to go to Africa to help rebuild, under, the end of the colonial empire in so many African nations. And it was the Berlin Conference of 1884 where they carved up Africa into all of those puzzle pieces and define those borders. This belongs to the Dutch, this belongs to the Portuguese, this belongs to the English, this belongs to the French. And that was one of the reasons why the Germans started World War II, because they didn't feel they got their fair share of Africa
Right.
at the Berlin Conference of 1884, where the white Europeans divided the continent up and said, this is yours, this is mine, this is ours, this belongs to so and so. And that's when the piracy and the historical looting actually began on the continent. And Walter Rodney wrote an incredible book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa,
Hmm.
because the precious minerals were being raped out of the soil of the continent for nickels a ton, shipped over to Europe, refined, and then sold back to the very countries where they were extricated for thousands of dollars a pound or a ton, because these are precious minerals that are available nowhere else on the planet. And they're in
Hmm.
our cell phones, our TVs, as I mentioned, our computers with new technology. Most of the stuff we own contains parts of the motherland. All right.
Well, that reminds me, it's a good story. Sitting on a veranda in a hotel in Montego Bay, looking out on vacation, Bobby and I, and looking out, maybe, I don't know if we're looking right into cane fields, but cane was around, and cane obviously is where sugar it comes from.
Mhm.
And so I just remember being very conscious of asking for a packet of sugar to go in my coffee, and I get sugar from, I think, Domino's or
Yeah.
somebody. So I'm looking at a cane field,
Mhm.
figuratively anyway, where the basis for the sugar is made, and I'm served a package of sugar
American
that has
sugar,
been processed right
refined.
here,
Yeah. Mhm.
somewhere in Louisiana or
Sure.
somewhere in this country. Or maybe
Huh?
I'm even eating rice that has grown here that could have been grown there. So that's the process. How do you extract? So it's like being in Ghana, Youssef,
Yeah.
and wanting
Sure.
to have some chocolate, Ghanaian chocolate, best in the world, but it's
Hey,
called Belgian chocolate.
and what
No
happened?
chocolate
What
grown
happened
in
when
Belgium.
Kwame Nkrumah declared the independence of Ghana? The
Mhm.
major export was cocoa,
Yeah.
and Nestle's cocoa emptied their warehouses all over the planet and drove the price so low that all of the Ghanaian farmers marched on the capital with their pitchforks, okay, to overthrow the government. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah.
So, the question is, how do we move forward as a community, as a culture, both at the personal, neighborhood, granular level, but in a way that suggests some protocols, some standards, some expectations that are common, some understandings that are common, and that allow us to build recognizing who we are, recognizing the terrain over which we've come, but also envisioning a future in which our best selves can emerge in freedom, in justice, in a moral stance that befits the identity we seek to have for ourselves and we seek to accord every other human being. How do we get there? And
Well,
language is one of the key things. I'm looking at a couple of things.
mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with this book here, Metu Neter. You
No,
familiar with
sir,
that?
not
Okay.
yet.
It's I'm just now getting into it. I've had this book around 20 years. I'm just now starting to read it, right?
Hmm.
But it's a book about the ancient Egyptian system of spiritual cultivation. Goes into uh, the study of hieroglyphics or Egyptian language, in the early
Hmm.
Egyptian and African dynasties. And then I'm also looking at another book that's related. It's called Wat in Shemsh, Myth, History, Philosophy, and Literature by a brother named Ai Kwe Arma.
Sure.
And this
Yeah.
book,
Tough brother.
I just,
Aikwayama.
you
Tough.
know, you know his work.
I do.
I
Yeah.
just, I just got aware of him last week, so I got the book right away. So I just got into this, but the proposition is that we have to go back and study our own selves, our own story, and our story about creation, and build a future based on what we know about who we are. And the other piece I'll show you that I'm just now getting into, and I'm going to read a paragraph of it, a book called Sanhat, Multilingual Translation of Ancient African Hieroglyphic Texts. So all this comes down to me wanting to join a class where I can study hieroglyphics. And what I'm discovering through these conversations is that the language, the literature is accessible, and that we really, once we set our minds to it, are comfortable with it. That it's almost natural for us. We've been mythologized into thinking that the writing, the drawing writings on the tombs of Africa was something that some aliens did and incomprehensible. Absolutely not true. Our people wrote that, and it's a common uh, organic visualization of reality in the universe. And if we created it, we can understand it still. And to understand that is another way to reorder our lives that reflects our sense of origin and our sense of destiny. And so this one, I'm going to read just two paragraphs. It says, ask an African, an Asian, and a European to recount the oldest story they know from their literary tradition. The
Mm.
European may cite the Odyssey or the Iliad, a 3,000-year-old Homeric text from Greece. The Asian might mention a 6th century BC text by Confucius, but the African's memory may reach back only a few centuries to a vague oral tradition. Second paragraph. This debilitating intellectual syndrome, the unnaturally short historical memory crippling African intellectuals, was a European colonial invention, a result of the racist doctrine according to which Africa had no history, literature, or philosophy, no intellectual heritage except what invading Europeans brought. So it goes from there. I'm just starting to read this, and this book is interesting because it's going through actual texts, but the texts are translated into uh, 4 or 5 different languages all on the same page. The translation is just a second. I'll show you here. Uh, so there's a script, as you can see that, the hieroglyphics, but the meaning of it is translated into Akan, English, French, Kikongo, Kiswahili, Portuguese, Wolof,
Wow.
and Zulu. And
Wow.
so I'm looking forward to having some fun over the next months, going through this page by page and getting a sense and a feeling for what the hieroglyphs meant and what they are. And the point of it is this. Uh, we cannot find a solution uh, in the language or the ideation of those who oppressed us. Uh, if we intend to overcome and go beyond the status of the oppressed, how will we do it? Will the oppressor deliver to us
Okay.
freedom to do anything except for to be like him or her? And that is an oppressor. And obviously, the object of their oppression is us. So we can become our own oppressors, right? If we, you know, that shows up, Yusuf, in what happened with the Americo-Liberians.
Yeah.
Those Black people from here, former slaves,
Yeah.
that went back to Liberia, set up a relationship and a history or relationships with the indigenous Liberians that was just as
Dominant and subordinate.
mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like
Mhm.
Black white people,
Sure.
you know, and carried it out. And we've all heard the term, speaking of Francophone Africans, more French than the French. That
Mhm. Oh yeah.
so how do we
Oh
get
yeah.
out of this idea that our only pathway to success and freedom is by being more white than white people, better whites than whites, and can we find a way to delve into the wellspring of the African personality, if such exists, and out of it come through, bring forward a meaning of the world that is humane and that is respectful of all life, animal life, and respectful of the environment itself. What do you think?
Well, in Timbuktu, which the French renamed Timbuktu,
Mm-hmm.
there was a university, and above the archway going into the university were three words: know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in looking at Egyptology, you're not only in the right neighborhood, you're at the right address, Hal.
Mm-hmm.
Because let me just give you a little background. I mean, we believe Black history is every day, not just the 28 in the shortest month of the year. If you look at the juxtaposition of the first 9 pyramids, how they relate to one another in terms of their location, it is the same as the juxtaposition of the 9 planets in our solar system.
Hmm.
Okay. And if you take the angles of the pyramid and you multiply them by themselves, they result in the exact diameter of the Earth at the equator. Okay.
Wow.
This is not a coincidence. All right. The Egyptians tracked the path of our 9 planets through the solar system, and they said it took 56,000 years.
Yeah.
And in one of the pyramids, they found maps of 3 successive journeys through the solar system. That's 168,000 years. And I forget the African country, they found maps on the walls in a cave of a distant solar system that they have only recently discovered with the Hubble telescope.
Mm-hmm.
And who was the boy who had the show about astrology every week? I forget his name.
I know you mean. I'll think of it in a second. Yeah.
He said, and they discovered this map of this solar system, the Dogon,
Mm-hmm.
where was the African tribe that scribbled this on the walls of this cave. And I had his name, Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan.
Okay.
He said, aliens must have come to our planet and vomited this information at the feet of the Africans because, God forbid, they don't have enough knowledge and history to have been able to discern this among themselves. If you look at the origins of religion, of science, of agriculture, of politics, of medicine, of education, all of the things that we take for granted today come out of the continent. You know, I mean, all of us come out of the continent because they're finding older bones and older stones,
Mm-hmm.
4.5, 5 million years. And any anthropologist with an 8th grade education will tell you, look, civilization began in Africa, and then people spread out across the planet, by land, by water,
Hmm.
by sea, however they were able to do that. And we pray to African gods today in Baptist and Catholic and Methodist and Episcopal churches and don't even realize it. Because what do we say what's the word we use at the end of a prayer?
Amen. Amen.
And and who was Amen Ra?
Hmm.
Okay. The
Hmm.
Coptic faith is the oldest religion on this planet. And they believe that there was one major God, the sun god, Amen Ra. Okay.
Hmm.
And he had four lesser gods who each had a son and a daughter, and they named a constellation in the sky after each of them. That's a total of 12 if you've got four sub-gods, and each one has a son and a daughter.
Hmm.
And the Europeans came along and said, well, gee, that's interesting. We're going to turn that into a horoscope, okay, into, telling people what their birth sign is and so on and so forth, just plagiarizing the Coptic faith, an Egyptian religion. And it told them when to plant, when to harvest. It followed the menstrual cycle. It had 365 and 1/4 days. It did
Hmm.
not need a leap year. And
Right.
every 25,000 years, the calendar adjusted itself automatically. I mean,
Hmm.
these people were tough, okay?
Hmm.
When they got hot, they threw spears at the sun. And you know what? Temperature went down a few degrees, okay, because they felt better for having tried to do something about it. And there was so much when Napoleon went into Egypt, he looked up at the Great Sphinx of Egypt and he said, "How old is that?" And one of his academics that he brought along said, "Oh, it's only about 6,000 years." And he said, 6,000 years? And it's got a black man on it? We can't have that. Bring the cannons, okay? And they shot cannons at the Sphinx of Giza, which is why his face is so distorted,
Blow the
because
nose off. Yeah.
Napoleon could not stand the fact that there was a statue of a black man on a lion, okay, that was 6,000 years old. And his own history only went back, 400 or 500 years that they could
Hmm.
trace
Hmm.
academically. And so this is us. This is where we come from. And in Egypt, they didn't have trees, they didn't have forests. They imported the wood from neighboring countries. Okay, they imported the leather. They imported the process for smelting iron and lead and copper and building tools and building pyramids, and creating an incredible civilization that, for all intents and purposes, was basically torn asunder. So, your question, how do we go forward? I think if John Henrik Clarke says that, the relationship of any people to their history is the same as the relationship of a child to its mother. Okay. That history is a clock that people use to tell their time of day,
Hmm.
that it is a compass where people find themselves on the map of human geography. And history not only tells the people where they've been and how they've got to where they're at, but where they still must go and what they still must be and do. So, first, we have to know thyself. Okay. We have to understand who we are, where we came from, how we got here, and what our legacy and our obligation is. Then, in terms of going forward in this country, we have been turned into capitalist consumers. Okay, everybody wants to achieve, buy, go in debt, charge, get credit, buy fancy things and keep up with the Joneses. And what we really need to do is to tune our social practice so that we're not dealing or purchasing from people who don't have our best interests at heart. Okay, from people who are exploiting the environment, who from companies that have class and racial, class action suits, sex class action suits,
Hmm.
from companies that don't make nuclear products or cluster bombs or military products. And can you imagine buying a lawn dart for one of your children on their birthday? These are darts that are like 10 inches tall with
Hmm.
a nail coming out of the tip. And you're supposed to throw it up in the air and then run like hell so it doesn't come down, stick you in the head. They call them lawn darts. And you put the bullseye on the ground, and
Hmm.
presumably the dart is supposed to fall on the bullseye rather
Bullseye.
than in your eye or in the back of your head. So we have to become very practicable individuals. When I was the president of the Urban Coalition, we started a socially responsible pension program, okay? And it earned 30% dividends because we only worked with companies who had the kind of social practices that reflected the kind of community and civilization that we wanted to be a part of, okay? We didn't go after the get rich quick, exploit people, take advantage of women, immigrants, poor people, migrants, or people who worked in the orange groves or what have you.
Mhm.
And people were amazed at the kind of dividends that we got from investing in socially responsible companies. And you do that through your purchasing habits. You do it through saving. Why? Because 60% of the people in this country, if they had a $400 emergency, have already failed.
Mhm.
They couldn't come to their own aid. They'd have to borrow, sell, beg, or steal, or do something to come up with $400. And a
Mhm.
lot of people in our community don't have savings account. The number one way that wealth travels from one generation to the other, you know what it is
Home
land
ownership.
or property.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Home ownership is critical.
Mhm.
All right. And the people who have home ownership can get home equity loans to pay their children's college tuition. I
Mhm.
did. And my
Mhm.
daughter got 3 degrees and is working on a PhD. And there's no
Mhm.
other way I could have done it because
Yep.
I've spent my entire life working in nonprofit organizations.
Mhm.
And I would not have done anything different because, the only thing that increases in the production process is the value of labor.
Mhm.
Okay. It's Karl Marx. And I wanted the value of my labor to benefit the community that I'm a part of, okay? Because my favorite principle in the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles of blackness, is kuumba, which on the surface means creativity, but beneath that, it means that each of us has a responsibility to leave our community more beautiful than it was when we inherited it, when we were born into it, okay? That's our legacy, okay? To leave shoulders strong enough and broad enough for our children to stand on so that they don't have to make the same mistakes that we did in order to learn from them, and so that they can accomplish bigger and greater things on behalf of our community than we were able to. And Al, your and my generation, being the same age, haven't begun to pay dues in our
Mhm.
early 70s
Mhm.
for what our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents had to submit to.
Yep.
My wife's father from Arkansas, if he wanted to laugh in public, he had to find a rain barrel and stick his head in it and laugh
Mhm.
in the barrel. Because
Mhm.
if he laughed out loud in public, he'd go to jail. It was
Mhm.
against the law for Negroes to laugh in public. All right. And so I look back at my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents, and I feel such an obligation, such a debt of responsibility to uphold the legacy that they built, as I said earlier, that created the benefits and the privileges
Yep.
that we enjoy today. Because literally, our parents in many parts of this country, if they passed a white person on the sidewalk, had to get off the sidewalk and walk in the mud, okay?
Mhm.
Had to look down at their feet, and we're not allowed to look.
Not only our parents, some of us use that. Bobby tells me, my wife Bobby grew up in Crystal Springs, Mississippi, and one of the stories she tells me all the time is being in a town store. Crystal Springs, a town of around 4,000 people,
Mhm.
20 miles south of Jackson, and being in a store with her grandmother. She was maybe 7, 8, 9 years old at the time, but accidentally bumping into an 8-year-old white girl and having mortal fear. So by the age of
Yeah,
8, she was attuned to the oppression and the structure, the social order
sure.
that privileged white people to walk freely and that demanded and commanded Black people on pain of death that they get out of the way and not look
Absolutely.
directly at white
Yeah.
people. And I also
Oh,
say
hey,
that my great grandmother's sister, who lived with us until she died. She was maybe 100 years old or so, and I had a conversation with her, and I was maybe 12, and she called me in and to her room, and she said, "Well, Alvin, I want you to remember." And this was the talk. because I'm not sure if I was getting ready to go to Atlanta for an NAACP meeting, or I'm not sure what the occasion was. But she said, make sure when you around white people, always say yes'm and no'm, yessa, no'sir. But she told me how to say it, how to articulate the sound of subservience, right? And so I tell people that I listened to her. I was probably sweating and burning up with rage inside and angry that I had to hear this and angry that she had to tell me that. But at the same time, I also knew what she was saying is if you want to live, grandson, a young boy, if you want to live, you have to know, because if you don't, the people that are
Hey,
after you will use anything to kill you. And so that's something that isn't that far back. It's still around, you said.
we are all the children of Emmett Till. And do you
Mm-hmm.
know where the term Ms. came from? MS? From the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they approached a white woman and said, yes, miss,
Mm-hmm.
and she was married, they'd get a beating. If they said, yes, Mrs., and she was single, they'd get a beating. So they would say, yes, Mims.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yes, Miss. All
Cover
right.
all the bases.
And they said, did you say Miss? Yes, Miss. Did you say Mrs.? Yes, Mrs. Yes, Miss. You know,
Yeah.
and today it's a popular part of the vernacular
Yeah.
to refer to
Yeah.
people as Ms. Okay, people don't want their marital status publicized or the
Mm-hmm.
fact that they're unmarried. I'm not sure what the drama is. You know, I mean, they're still entitled to achieve their maximum full, human potential as far as I'm concerned. But no, and the Ninth Federal District Bank in Atlanta did a study across the country and said that Black people had mortgages declined at a higher rate right here in the Twin Cities than anywhere else in the United States. And my grandmother used to say, boy, everything south of the North Pole is south. So
Yep.
don't believe that nonsense about north and south. Okay. And don't be trying to impose it on anybody else. But
Mm-hmm.
we talked about historical imposition, where people would define for others every aspect of their lives, and limit. And, we know that it was against the law for slaves to learn how to read. And you have to read Frederick Douglass, when he learned how to read the things that he captured. I mean, he was an incredible writer.
Yeah.
And Dr. King talked about the fact in the letter from a Birmingham jail, which is one of the most important pieces of literature in the 20th century, the last century, the ones that started with 19. He talked about going to the store and having with his parents as a young child, and they had to buy things. They couldn't go in the back room and try them on first to see whether or not they fit. You had to pick it up and buy it on site. You were not going to try it on and put it back on that shelf or that rack
Right.
if you were
Right.
Black. Okay. And he talked about, Daddy, how come colored children can't go to Fun Town? Okay. And he said it creates clouds of inferiority in our children's tiny mental skies. I mean, just and it was originally written on toilet paper in the Birmingham jail. And it was written to the rabbis and the ministers and the priests in Birmingham who were saying, y'all just need to wait, and just let things change and happen on their own. Quit agitating, quit, trying to get voting rights and
Got to
all of
go
this other
slow.
nonsense.
Go slow.
And the title was Why We Can't Wait.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
And he said, when your grandparents are referred to as boy or uncle, okay, and they refuse to address your mother by her first name, then you'll understand why we can't wait. And he was absolutely correct. He was absolutely correct. He had a PhD in systematic theology, but he was a general. He might have been a private in the war on poverty, but he was a general in terms of his intellectual capacity and his ability to to forecast what was happening and help bring about change. And it wasn't back in the day. You're absolutely right. The past is not only past, but it
It's
ain't
here.
dead.
That's
Okay?
right. And it's still with us. Still with us. That's right.
And the past is the foundation on which today is built. And when we combine our knowledge from the past with what we know today, that, becomes the platform on which we project the future and then achieve it. And Jesse Jackson used to say, if you can't conceive it, you can't achieve it. And a lot of people in our community, unfortunately, have forgotten even how to dream. They're just happy with the leftovers, with being left alone, with not being arrested, with staying, 6 weeks ahead of the book collector or whatever they're doing. And we have a responsibility to guide, to educate, to organize, to help those folks advance.
That goes back to
if hard work made people rich, we would all be billionaires.
That's right.
Based on the wealth of our ancestors.
We did the work, but it goes back to what you said about classes of awareness in our community. Why don't you say that again? You say there are four groups, kind of.
Four groups. The first group are those who understand what time it is and are prepared to commit their lives to working to liberate the minds of Black people. The second group understand what time it is, but they consider any sacrifice or commitment that they make that doesn't result in a pay increase or front page on the colored paper as extra personal or self-sacrifice. I got mine, y'all got to get your own. I ain't got time for all that mess. The third group are the majority of our people, and they live from hand to mouth, from day to day, and every day they can get up and look in the mirror and brush their teeth is a celebration because it's mostly about survival. And the fourth group are those who are opposed clearly and plainly. Maya Angelou said, when people tell you who they are, they show you who they are, believe them, okay? And there are some predators in our community. There are some people who are opposed to forward progress for Black people because they benefit from where we are at, politically, economically, culturally, etc. So it is important that, I'm sorry, Johnny Guitar Watson is ringing my telephone in the background. The responsibility of those of us who dare to define ourselves as members of the first group is to organize the first group, those who are committed and understand what time it is, to convince the second group, those who understand but kind of feel like, I got mine, you all get your own. We got to convince them to get on board. We have to educate the third group, and we have to remove from the path of our forward progress those people who are opposed to it and who are members of that fourth group who benefit from our existence. Okay, so organize, convince, educate, and neutralize, okay, is what we need to do if we're members of the first group with the members of the four groups that comprise our community. Because a lot of people, sort of have an idea of what's happening, but don't want to get involved and don't have the time and have other priorities and need to be very careful about what the white folks on the job learn or know or think about me, because I have to kind of keep my back to the wall and stay under the radar for the rest of my life. And, some people, when you say, hey, what's happening? Nothing. Where are you going? Nowhere. What you got to look forward to? Nothing more, and it's kind of sad that people are trapped in that downward spiral of existence, Al, and they shouldn't be. They don't deserve to be. And a lot of them are single Black women who are taking care of some man or some men's as chillins, okay? And some are senior citizens who need housing assistance, health assistance, who need support, who just need somebody to talk to because they're lonely, they're isolated, they feel like they've been abandoned. The children and the grandchildren don't come see them, don't communicate with them. Let me say this and then I'm a hush. I was in Atlanta and I stayed in the Oh Jesus Hotel because the aquarium, the atrium is about 45 stories tall. And when you walk in there, people go, oh, Jesus, because it's so tall. And I was waiting for the elevator. And because of all the floors and a limited number of elevators, you usually had to wait 2 or 3 minutes unless an elevator was near you. And there was a sister, a Black woman, was coming down the hallway pushing her cart. Okay, she was one of the maids or the people that clean up the rooms and stuff. And she went past me and she kind of looked up, but she wasn't allowed to speak. And I was at Howard University and a woman grabbed me by the back of my neck. I asked the janitor for directions and she said, son, you have good hair and you speak the King's English, learn this. We don't fraternize with the help.
Mm.
I was in shock. Anyhow, so this woman was bent over and she was hurting and aching, and she was humming. And I said, "Pardon me, miss, do I know you?" And she turned around and she had to crick her neck to look up. And she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Yusuf M. Janey." And she said, "No, I'd have remembered you with a name like that. Where are you from?" I said, I'm from Minnesota." And she said, "No, I don't believe we've had the pleasure of meeting. Why did you ask?" And I said, "Well, because I never forget a pretty face. And I'd have swore that you and I met somewhere along the way." And she looked at me and she smiled. She said, "Go on, boy." And when she was coming up the hall toward me, she was all bent over this cart, with the sheets and the little toiletries that we take home out of the bathroom and stuff.
Sure.
And when the elevator came, I looked back and she was standing up and her chest was poking out. And she said, "You have a good day, son. Now you're here." God bless you, sweetheart. But I think that's revolutionary, because she may go home and her grandson may come home from school crying, or a bully beat him up, or they talked about little black Sambo in English class, and he might climb in her lap, and she's going to take some of that energy and put her arms around him and give it to him. And I was just saying, "Hey, God bless you. How are you? Have a nice day. Here's who I am. Who are you?" And it didn't cost me anything. It took about 20 seconds, but I wasn't trying to be flippant. I said, "Well, I never forget a pretty face." And I had a swore that we met somewhere, and she had to be 30, 40 years older than I was. But I think we need to do that. We need to acknowledge people.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to pat them on the back. We need to give them, so if we got some positive energy, we need to share it and uplift everybody that we come in contact with. And when I speak to white people and they keep going right by, I speak to them again. I say, "Good morning." Oh, morning. And I don't care whether it's morning or good morning, but you're going to acknowledge me.
That's right. You're going to see me.
We were taught, when you interact or come in contact, you are supposed to acknowledge that other person. Say, "Good day, good morning, good afternoon, hello, how are you?" Just something. And you're not going by me like I'm an invisible man. Okay, I ain't Ralph Ellison. And you're going to acknowledge me if I acknowledge you. The other thing I want to say, these folks used to approach me and say, "Well, what do you know about blah, blah, blah?" And I said, "Well, gee, I don't know very much. What do you know?" Okay. Then I would know what I knew plus what they knew.
That's
and I'd be twice as tough as they were. Okay. So, hey.
Let's leave it there. Yusuf, great talking with you as always. I love the fact that we're simply having this conversation. And I think that's what we got to do every day. Just reach out.
To be had. Thank you, Al.
I call what you described in recognizing the humanity of the woman, the principle, the process, the protocol of reaching and seeing and connecting with the presence of God in the other human being. And if we look for that person in his or her best self, we are extending our best self as well. There we create a new world. Yusuf, we'll see you next week, brother. Take care.